There are only two great Tomb Raider games, the first and the third. Their greatness comes from gorgeous, exotic locations, a thrilling sense of absolute isolation, and, by far the most important of all, a fucked up difficulty level. My dominatrix calls me a masochist, and that may well be so, as I find the quality of Tomb Raider games scales directly with their difficulty. So I knew going into Tomb Raider Underworld that I wasn't going to like it. I hadn't prejudged it or anything. It was just inevitably going to be as blandly easy as its immediate predecessor, Tomb Raider Legend. And it is. Two reasons. One, no traps. Two, checkpoints every 10 seconds. I find it fascinating that in an age dominated by the MMORPG and the online FPS, the repetition of content is so looked down upon in single-player games. The powers that be are absolutely scared shitless of putting out a game that actually requires skill to complete it, and that dares to punish you with repeating content if you happen to die. And Tomb Raider Underworld falls victim to this fear. In the past, my friends and I would actually have competitions to see who could finish new Tomb Raider games first, because they really were those kind of games. Today, the only challenging part of Tomb Raider is getting Lara to jump in the direction you're actually trying to jump. As gaming has gotten more and more mainstream, gaming has gotten easier and easier, and that's what really hurts Underworld. In the first and third Tomb Raiders, your limited capacity to save, coupled with all those instant death situations, meant that you really felt the panic and fear when that spike trap flung at you or that tiger leapt at you. Death meant replaying through fairly large chunks of the game anyway, up to 15 or more minutes, making death very undesirable, making every part of the game extremely tense, and it's that tension that makes it so exciting. I understand that repeating content in a single player game is undesirable, doubly so for all the fucking babies playing games today, but Tomb Raider, which was originally derived from trial and error-ish platformers like Another World, Prince of Persia and Flashback, is built entirely around the concept of success having no value if there is not a clear risk of failure. Underworld doesn't just imbalance this very delicate decades-old gameplay concept, it forgoes it entirely. There are two ways you can make a game like Tomb Raider work. Either you make it extremely hard and have frequent respawns, which the games on which Tomb Raider is based did, or you make it fairly hard and spread out the save points, which is what Tomb Raider 1 and 3 did. Underworld does neither. It has checkpoints every 10 seconds, that's not a joke, they are about every 10 seconds. But it's also extremely easy. There's no challenge whatsoever, and whenever you happen to die, the majority of such instances being either caused by a bad camera or you just idly seeing if you can make a jump that you know you probably can't make, you simply respawn right there with no penalty or loss. I criticised Prince of Persia 2008 for this, using the analogy that it is like playing a racing game where the competing drivers simply idle at the finishing line. It is not a matter of if you win, but when. And without the challenge, what is the point? Another thing I said in my Prince of Persia 2008 review is that a Prince of Persia game without traps is like a Tomb Raider game without tits. Well, Underworld certainly has the tits, but it also doesn't have the traps, which are as iconic an element of Tomb Raider as they are of Prince of Persia. Think back to the original Tomb Raider. I bet your strongest memories are of things like the swords in the Hall of Damocles, or Atlas' giant crushing ball rolling at you, or perhaps the Tyrannosaurus, which, while not a trap, would still fuck you up. Those cool, intense moments are almost all gone in Underworld. I have to say almost because there are actually a few traps in the game, but the first doesn't come until level 5 of 8, and even then, they are very few, and very simple. Oh no, that was hard. And without the traps, the game is really nothing more than navigating an environment. In the good Tomb Raider games, everything is tense as death can come from any mistimed jump, but the traps really punctuated the slower paced platforming with intensity and excitement. Underworld completely lacks this, and if it at least had the breakneck platforming pace of Sands of Time, that might be thrilling, but Underworld plods along slowly. I actually ended up playing in chunks barely 15 minutes long, because I was just completely bored while playing the game. The weird thing is that there are actually a large number of ways that you can tailor the difficulty of the game. from things like how much damage enemies do to how much time you have to hit the grab button if Lara is going to fall. But with such generous respawn checkpoints, these things do not matter at all. The enemies do at least bring a decent sense of lethality to the game. You probably get fucked up pretty badly by the first group of tigers you meet, but as you master the slow motion feature, it starts to become fairly trivial. Tomb Raider has always had fairly rubbish combat, and to spice it up a bit, they've put in the most abused shooter gameplay on this console gen: slow motion. As Lara fires her weapons, she stores up adrenaline or whatever, and at any point she can unleash it to go into slow motion. It's kind of neat the way it works as a finite resource that you have to manage, but it doesn't really make the combat any better, as you're still just holding the auto aim button and the fire button while jumping around, only now you're doing it really, really slowly. It's no surprise they're ripping combat out entirely for the next Tomb Raider game. One thing they do at least appear to have figured out is that Tomb Raider's combat is at its best when Lara's fighting animals rather than men. This is in part because Tomb Raider relies to an extent on a sense of isolation that humans undermine, but also because the AI is just fucking terrible. Terrible. So most of the enemies in Underworld are animals, but there are still a fair few humans to gun down, and when you do fight humans, this is what you can expect. The game is also extremely short. There are only 8 levels, and not only are 2 of those each 15 minutes long, they are the same level repeated twice. It's utterly insipid. What we're really talking about here is 6 levels, which are barely 7 hours long. The level design is alright for the most part, but this stuff is extremely rote. You jump to a ledge, you jump to a ledge above, you turn around, jump to another ledge, jump to a pole, slide down the pole, jump to a ledge. Without that key ingredient, danger, the level design fails to rise at all. The bright grey appearance of grabbable ledges makes it very easy to figure out where you're going once you're climbing, but actually finding those starting points can be pretty challenging, by which I mean tedious. There were times when I was just running around in circles unable to find that elusive grey ledge, but for the most part, figuring out where to go and what to do is very obvious. Although the few puzzles in the game are extremely simple, if you do happen to get stuck at any point, which is hard to imagine, Lara will tell you what to do through the field assistance thing, and the sonar will conveniently light up everything in the area that can be manipulated. This turns Underworld from a game where it's very hard to get stuck, to a game where it's impossible to get stuck. The graphics, at least, are incredible. The environments are gorgeous and diverse, and this is probably the first Tomb Raider game where the visual ambition doesn't outreach its quality. There's all manner of tombs and temples, caverns and caves, jungle ruins and snowy mountaintops, and it all looks, as you can see, quite wonderful. Lara's animations also look pretty fantastic too, but the way they merge together has no fluidity to it at all. The music is also pretty good, ranging from the subtle and understated to the bombastic and dramatic, which is something Tomb Raider has always done well, and Underworld is no exception. The voice acting and sundry sound effects are all fine, with nothing standing out as either especially good or bad. Underworld is a game that zigzags between triviality and tedium, with the frequent checkpoints and near total absence of death traps ultimately being what kills it. If you like to have Mummy hold your hands while Daddy spoon feeds you delicious brown mush, Underworld will probably have some appeal. But for everyone who's managed to master the art of standing upright, Underworld holds absolutely no value whatsoever besides Lara's lovely pert buttocks.